Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I offer an update on the case of Cleo Smith? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, including the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. In October 2021, 4-year-old Cleo Smith lived with her family in Carnarvon, Australia. This is in the state of Western Australia. She was cared for by her mother, Ellie Smith, and her stepfather, Jake Glidden. Cleo also had a younger sister. On October 15, 2021, Cleo and her family went on a vacation to the Quoba Blowholes campsite, which is about 50 miles north of where they lived. They arrived at about 6:30 p.m. The family stayed in a multi-room tent. There were over 100 other people at the same campsite. Cleo went to sleep at about 8 p.m. She was on an air mattress right next to her younger sister, who was sleeping in a cot. Cleo's mother, Ellie, was sleeping in another room in the same tent. At 1:30 a.m., now on October 16, Cleo woke up and requested water. After drinking the water, she went back to sleep. As the family was sleeping in their tent, a 36-year-old man named Terrence Darrell Kelly made his way to the campsite. He lived in Carnarvon. His house was only about 2 miles away from where Cleo and her family lived. Terrence was high on methamphetamine and was looking to steal from tents and motor vehicles at the campsite. Sometime between 2:40 and 4:40 a.m., Terrence unzipped the tent that Cleo and her family were in. Upon seeing Cleo, Terrence decided to kidnap her. This appeared to be a crime of opportunity. He grabbed Cleo's sleeping bag with her in it and made his way back to his vehicle. Terrence then used dirt roads to avoid detection on the trip back to his house. At 3:05 a.m., which was either right before or after the kidnapping, Terrence activated his phone. He had deactivated it prior to arriving in the area. It's not clear why he chose to turn it back on. His phone pinged a tower near the campsite. This would later prove quite important. At about 6:20 a.m., Cleo's mother, Ellie, woke up and realized that Cleo and her sleeping bag were missing from the tent. The entryway to the tent was almost all the way open. When it had been closed, the zipper was higher than Cleo could have reached. This, combined with the missing sleeping bag, made it look like Cleo was kidnapped as opposed to simply walking away from the tent on her own. The police were called at 6:23 a.m. and arrived at the campsite at 7:10 a.m. They conducted an intense search of the area around the campsite, but after 5 days without success, they concluded that Cleo was not there. They realized that someone must have taken her. On October 21, the Western Australian government offered a $1 million reward for information leading to the return of Cleo Smith. The police started analyzing massive amounts of data. For example, they received hundreds of tips. They had to review tens of thousands of hours of surveillance video. The police searched garbage bins hoping to find any clue about where Cleo was or who could have taken her. And they analyzed cell phone activity, including data from the tower near the campsite. There were hundreds of thousands of data sets from that one tower. As the data analysis continued, Terrence Kelly started to emerge as the prime suspect. On November 2, the police placed his house under surveillance. When he left, they pulled him over and placed him under arrest. At 12:46 a.m., now on November 3, the police raided his house and found Cleo Smith alone in a bedroom. She was playing with dolls and appeared to be unharmed, at least physically. A detective asked for her name 3 times. After the 3rd time, she responded, "My name is Cleo." On November 4, Terrence Kelly was charged with forcibly taking a child under 16 and other offenses. He admitted that he was responsible. He told the police that he had attempted to restrain Cleo with tape, but she resisted. He also mentioned roughing her up when she became bossy or asked for chocolate. When Terrence was home, Cleo was free to wander around his house. When he left for work, he locked her in a bedroom and turned on a radio so people would not be able to hear Cleo. Eventually, Terrence pleaded guilty to child stealing and obstructing police officers. On April 5, 2023, he was sentenced to 13 and a half years in prison. The maximum sentence was 20 years, but Terrence received credit for time served, as well as a 25% early guilty plea discount. He will be eligible for parole in 11 and a half years. Now moving to my analysis. There is no question that Terrence Kelly was guilty of kidnapping Cleo Smith. The debate in this case is really about his level of culpability. What would a fair sentence look like in this case? His defense made an argument that he was mentally ill and therefore impaired. Let's take a look at the background of Terrence Kelly. He was born sometime around 1985 in an indigenous community in Wickham, Australia. This is almost 1,000 miles north of Perth. His family was economically disadvantaged, and his parents fought with each other. His mother drank heavily and used marijuana, and his father was violent. When Terrence was 2 years old, social workers found alcohol in his baby bottles. His parents abandoned him, and he was placed in the care of his aunt, who he viewed as his grandmother. His aunt had some difficulties of her own. She drank excessive quantities of alcohol, and social services removed all 6 of her biological children from her care. As if this wasn't bad enough, she also collected stone unicorns. Terrence had negative encounters with other children. For example, he developed a hearing impairment and was provided hearing aids, but stopped using them because he was bullied. When Terrence was around 7 years old, there was a radical shift in his behavior. He became difficult to manage. When he was 12 years old, his behavior became even worse after a visit from his parents. Sharp objects were found under his bed, and he was hospitalized due to thoughts of self-harm. Terrence was diagnosed with ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder. He also had trouble with bedwetting. Just before he turned 14, Terrence spent 2 weeks in his father's care. Social workers found that his father was violent during that visit. Around the same time, Terrence saw his mother for the last time. He was expelled from school due to difficult and disruptive behavior. His aunt could no longer care for him because he was violent, inappropriate, and antisocial. Sometime around 2014, Terrence was incarcerated for aggravated burglary, other burglary offenses, and possession of methamphetamine. He was released in 2017 and went back to live with his aunt. She died in 2020 at the age of 77, which left Terrence alone. He managed to avoid negative contact with law enforcement until he was arrested for kidnapping Cleo Smith. Mental health clinicians who assessed Terrence Kelly said that he had endured chronic and complex trauma, was profoundly disadvantaged, and had neurodevelopmental impairment. They thought his mother may have consumed alcohol when she was pregnant with him. Terrence may have developed fetal alcohol syndrome. Terrence was diagnosed with several disorders, including schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety. He was described as having antisocial, borderline, and narcissistic personality characteristics. Terrence was a loner who had a disturbed, fragile, and fragmented identity. He possessed low self-esteem and was socially awkward. In the time leading up to the kidnapping, Terrence was using methamphetamine. He was high on this drug at the time of the offense. Even though Terrence lived isolated from other people, he clearly had some desire to connect with others. Terrence had an ongoing fantasy where he was both a father and a husband. He had this large, fictitious family. He even created Facebook pages for his fictitious children and communicated with them. Terrence had a large collection of dolls. He had a particular affinity for a brand of doll referred to as Bratz, B-R-A-T-Z. These are dolls which have been described as disturbing and creepy. They have unusual proportions and are highly stylized. Terrence would drive around with these dolls in his vehicle, take selfies with them, and style their hair. Bratz dolls have been the center of a few controversies. I doubt that the brand's connection to Terrence is something they would want to promote. Like, I don't think they will be putting the words recommended by Terrence Kelly on the boxes anytime soon. The police believe that the kidnapping perpetrated by Terrence was a crime of opportunity. He was trying to steal property. When he saw Cleo, he decided to upgrade to kidnapping. His motive for the crime appears to be tied in with his fantasy. Terrence wanted to have a family. Cleo was like a real-life doll who Terrence may have thought of as a daughter. It's ironic that his aunt collected unicorns because in one sense, Terrence was a unicorn himself. His motive for kidnapping was extremely unusual. Most stranger abductions involve offenses related to sex and almost always involve homicide. But the motive here was really about feeding a delusion and having company. It does not appear as though Terrence intended to kill Cleo. Rather, he wanted to add her to his collection. He thought that having her in his house would make him a father. Some people have argued that the unusual nature of this case warranted a lighter sentence. Terrence had a terrible background and an atypical motive, but I'm not convinced that he deserved a lighter sentence. There is plenty of evidence suggesting that Terrence knew the difference between right and wrong. For example, he had deactivated his phone around the time of the kidnapping, he drove back to his house on dirt roads, and he changed the locks on the bedroom door where he kept Cleo. Terrence was trying to avoid getting caught because he knew that what he was doing was wrong. Considering how motivated Terrence was to escape responsibility, I think it stands to reason that he would have eventually hurt Cleo to conceal his crime. This kidnapping was not going to end well for her outside of being rescued. Terrence had Cleo for 18 days before the police found her. He had plenty of time to change his mind if he was really sorry about what he did. I think Terrence was highly committed to keeping Cleo. Just because Terrence had an atypical motivation does not make him morally enlightened compared to other kidnappers. Terrence was simply another type of terrible criminal. If he was a villain from a comic book, he probably would have been named the Doll Collector. Not a name that inspires feelings of contentment and safety. Another factor to consider in this case is the damage done to Cleo. Even though she did not appear to be physically harmed, she continues to have nightmares every week. Children are resilient, and I think it's likely that Cleo will recover, but the effects of trauma are often complex and long-lasting. Terrence has caused a lot of damage, some of which could be permanent. When considering all the factors, I think that Terrence received a fair sentence. One could argue that Terrence should not have received a 25% discount for an early guilty plea, although at least Terrence did not try to apply his friends and family discount, which he did appear to be eligible for based on his history. Now moving to the last question, what do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Terrence Kelly had a terrible upbringing that involved neglect and violence. He became defiant, antisocial, aggressive, narcissistic, and sensation-seeking. His symptoms interfered with his ability to have a family. Therefore, he constructed a fantasy world. This is a way of compensating for his perceived loss. It made him feel normal and satisfied. Over time, this compensatory strategy became less effective. Terrence wanted more. He started thinking about ways to have a real family. He wanted to construct one without going through the traditional means. He did not have the social skills to accomplish this goal in a non-criminal way. He decided that if he ever had the chance to steal a daughter, that's exactly what he would do. Through committing other crimes at the campsite, Terrence stumbled upon the opportunity to commit a kidnapping. He did not hesitate. He didn't care that he was committing a crime. He didn't care about Cleo's well-being. Terrence Kelly had fully surrendered to his own self-centeredness and sense of entitlement. That's my update on the case of Cleo Smith. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.